We learned a lot in the first week of the preseason because actually the starters played more than they normally do, and so we found out a little bit about some of the veterans. There were some injuries that we need to talk about, and some of the rookies are going to be moving up our rankings as well. Let's start with the rookie, and let's start with TreyVeon Henderson. Look, TreyVeon Henderson had been going in the 5th round of fantasy football drafts up until this point. Now, obviously, it doesn't really help those of us who are drafting TreyVeon at that price when he returns his first touch in the NFL for a touchdown on a kick return. Now, granted, it's the preseason. It doesn't really matter. You have to take all of these conclusions with a grain of salt. And Ramondre Stevenson did actually start for the Patriots. So when you're looking at the snap count there, he actually came out and did play with the first team. But TreyVeon, when he touched the ball, he had one run, and I think it was about 13 yards. And so he actually ended up looking pretty solid in his debut. He also had 3 receptions for 12 yards. And so you're looking at TreyVeon Henderson as potential receiving threat in that backfield as well. And I think you're really encouraged with what you saw from TreyVeon Henderson, and you saw him running with the first team some. Now, unfortunately for his fantasy football price, what this probably means, as we saw in a couple mock drafts last night, he's probably going to start going closer in the 4th round now, which for a rookie running back like TreyVeon Henderson, a 2nd round pick in the NFL draft, I can't really argue too much against, because I think TreyVeon has the skill set to ball out this year in fantasy football. He's definitely going to be moving up people's rankings. He's already moved up mine. I've already said I'm willing to take him now in the 4th round of my fantasy football drafts, but I think TreyVeon Henderson, now that everybody's kind of seen the skill set he has, I think he's going to be a huge riser in a lot of people's rankings. Let's talk about Tony Pollard. The reason Tony Pollard is a winner is, again, we've not really liked Tony Pollard this year from a fantasy football value perspective just because he was so inefficient last year. But you do have Tyjae Spears, who obviously is a loser here, coming out with the high ankle sprain, and that is going to affect his status for probably the beginning of the season. And I think Tyjae is a real threat to take away from Tony Pollard from a workload standpoint in fantasy football this year. And so even at the beginning of the year, not having Tyjae Spears, I think from a volume standpoint is a win, because in terms of the Titans' other running backs there, I don't think any of them are a threat to take any volume from Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard himself played fine. That Titans offense as a whole, I also have Calvin Ridley. I'll throw him in on here as well as a winner. You know, Calvin Ridley, I think, had 3 catches for like 50 yards or something like that. He wasn't on the field for long, but when him and Cam Ward were on the field, they looked good together. And Cam Ward was clearly targeting Calvin Ridley, and Calvin Ridley was very clearly the number 1 wide receiver in that offense, as we suspected. But I do think this kind of did show us, okay, actually, this rookie, Cam Ward, can get Calvin Ridley the ball. Calvin Ridley going in the 6th round right now, your fantasy football drafts. Tony Pollard like the 7th or 8th round. That Titans offense might not be as bad as we thought for fantasy football in 2025. There was not a ton of positives in the Colts game. Anthony Richardson's pinky was literally pointing the opposite direction. I was not happy about that. But the one thing that Nathan and I did notice watching the Colts game was Tyler Warren. And I think if you watched the Colts game, you noticed it too, because they were clearly looking for Tyler Warren. He had multiple targets in this game. And one of the first plays of the game, they set him up for a screen pass. They kept looking his way. They utilized him all over the field. The only place he didn't really play was the backfield, which I think he is going to play some out of the backfield, in certain sets for the Colts. He's going to be more of a traditionally used tight end, I think, than like a Bowers. He's not going to be like a super big yak guy. He's going to get a lot of targets, though. He reminds me more of a TJ Hawkinson type. And those types of tight ends can be very valuable in fantasy football because they are going to be high target guys, I think, no matter who's throwing him the ball. Because Anthony Richardson, before his pinky was pointed the opposite direction, I think he was targeting Tyler Warren quite a bit, and he did show that he could get at Tyler Warren. Daniel Jones came in the game, and he also got at Tyler Warren. On a completely separate note, I hate being a Colts fan. Having a quarterback battle between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones makes me want to jump off a bridge. But that's not really a winner or loser from this video. Okay, real quick, we do have a super deal that I wanted to tell you about with the season pass over on the Flock site. Not only can you get everything on the site right now, and you get it for $34, you get all of our draft guides, 4 draft guides, you get our algorithm for 2025. We do have a live league drafting tomorrow. If you would like to join a league that drafts live on this channel, use code DOMAIN. When you create your account, sign up for the season pass. We can potentially get you in a league and you can play with us, but you unlock everything the site has to offer, and it takes care of you from literally now until the end of the season in December, and it's $34. It ends up being like $3. I mean, it is legitimately the best deal in fantasy football space. So I got the link pinned in the comment. Go check it out. Again, use code DOMAIN and you can potentially get in a league with us. But let's keep going here. Bucky Irving is technically a winner because Rachaad White does have a groin strain or some kind of groin injury that he's going to have an MRI on. And while Bucky was plenty good last year and plenty efficient, and we're plenty confident that he's going to be good this year, you do have to keep in mind, Rachaad White last year was getting a fair amount of carries. And so even if Bucky Irving gets up to like 70% snap share, I think that's a win for Bucky. And so, in terms of that Buccaneers offense, we're obviously very high on that offense in general. But without Rachaad White there, I mean, Bucky Irving is going to get every valuable touch and probably be used as a receiver. You do have to look at Sean Tucker potentially coming into that running back 2 role. Sean Tucker, I think, is plenty capable. Obviously, he was a track star at Syracuse, but he hasn't really shown it in the NFL yet on a consistent basis. Now, if he does get his shot at running back 2, who knows what that means for Rachaad White long term. Regardless, Rachaad White wasn't going very high in drafts anyways, and Bucky's going in the second round. These guys were already far enough apart, and Bucky Irving, I think, is a winner because I think he does have an opportunity to get a lot of volume up front, whereas before I thought, they could have split it more 50-50 like they did last year. I think this could be a good thing for Bucky Irving. Obviously, everybody was keeping an eye on the Jaguars running back situation. And the weird thing was, pretty much through the entire camp so far, through all of training camp, all of the reports, all of the beat reporters had said that Tank Bigsby was consistently the guy running with the ones. In fact, the reports at the beginning of camp were that Travis Etienne was actually running as the third running back to come in the game. And so when the Jaguars' first team offense came out, which we can talk about this in a couple different ways, but we'll talk about the running backs first. And it was Travis Etienne pretty much every time with the first team offense. This does kind of flip how we're looking at this Jaguars backfield. Now, obviously, Travis Etienne you have to classify as a winner just because he did come out and he did play with the starters in the first week of the preseason. I think this says something. I think the loser here, though, are the people who draft Travis Etienne anyways, because you really don't want this guy on your fantasy football team. As somebody who drafted Travis Etienne in the Flock League, trust me, you don't want this guy on your fantasy football team. So I'm still avoiding that backfield. I think Tank Bigsby is still going to be the early down guy. Travis Etienne may be the late round guy, but the problem is Travis Etienne's not very good, and he's, and then you've got Bachel Toot in there who has fumble issues, but he's got a lot of athleticism. It's not really a backfield I want to touch. I really like the receivers there, though. We can talk about that. Travis Hunter pretty much played every snap with the first team offense for the Jaguars. He got, I think, 3 targets. I think BTJ had the same amount of targets. And so they both looked very good. I am a little bit more confident now. I think everybody's feeling, as we talked about in the video last week, I think everybody's feeling a little bit more confident now that those two guys can both be productive at the same time on the field together. And again, when I'm looking at the snap counts for this game, Brian Thomas, 12 snaps, 8 routes run, 2 targets. Travis Hunter, 11 snaps, 7 routes run, 2 targets. And so I think both these guys are going to get an opportunity. I think they're very different and complementary players. And yeah, he played every snap with the first team offense. I don't know what else you want to see. He's going right now in the 5th, 6th round of your fantasy football drafts. At Price, with the talent level that he is, he could easily be a league winner this year. I want you guys to know that. I think Travis Hunter could easily be a league winner. Now, the other thing is, he did play on defense quite a bit as well. And so I do think him playing on defense at all is a little bit of a negative for his fantasy football outlook, just because it does increase the chance that, he could get hurt, or, it does take away from his motor, whatever. You can make a ton of arguments in that regard. And I do think there's some merit to that. But Travis Hunter playing with the first team offense, I think, is a good sign. And I think that, honestly, I think both these guys, BTJ and Travis Hunter, are going to be guys that we'll be drafting this year. One surprise from the Denver Broncos game was actually RJ Harvey coming out and becoming the starter here. Because it was listed, you'll remember, and we can put the report up, everybody's freaking out. Everybody's freaking out because RJ Harvey was the 5th running back on the depth chart for the Denver Broncos. And we're like, I don't know what we're going to do here. He came out, he had 12 snaps to J.K. Dobbins' 7, 5 routes run to J.K. Dobbins' 4, 2 targets to his 1, and 7 carries to J.K. Dobbins' 0. It's not like they didn't. It would be completely different if J.K. Dobbins didn't play in this game. They both suited up. They both played. They actually played, I think, their whole first team offense, which, again, you're seeing more and more of this in the first week of the preseason. And I'm a fan because it actually lets us have fantasy football takeaways. I think RJ Harvey's the guy. And again, somebody made this point in our live stream. The investment that Sean Payton put in the running back like that should tell you all you need to know about how they're going to use him this year. I think Harvey's the guy. I think he's going to be the starter. I think Dobbins can still be a decent pick later in your fantasy football drafts, but this is positive news for Harvey, and I think everybody kind of has to admit that now, given that everybody pretty much thought that Harvey was going to probably start the season, and it's possibly still starts the season as the running back too. I just think this is a pretty good sign for him starting potentially as the one. I want to talk about the Eagles backfield, but I don't want to talk about Saquon Barkley. First of all, let's answer I want to answer both of these questions first. Amarian Hampton, obviously Najee Harris isn't back, but I have a ton of people asking me about the Slater injury and how that affects Amarian Hampton. I personally am not moving Amarian Hampton down in my rankings. I still think that he is going to produce, and I think the difference in production will be marginal. I think it could have more of an effect on Justin Herbert's fantasy production. Maybe you could make the argument for the receivers. It would have more of an impact on them. But personally, I'm not moving Hampton down in my rankings because of the Slater injury. Obviously, anytime you lose an all-pro tackle like Slater, it sucks. But I still don't feel like that's a reason for me to move him down. And so I believe, I'm recording this Sunday night, and I believe the Eagles, I don't want to say anything that's not true. Landon Dickerson, I'm pretty sure he carted off the field, couldn't put any apparent lower leg, couldn't put any weight. And so this is brand new to me. And so people are going to be asking about that as well. Look, we're already a little bit shaky on Saquon this season anyways. I don't think this really changed anything there either. I don't feel like I need to move Saquon down my rankings if they do end up losing Dickerson. But I do understand the apprehension behind taking those guys now that they have some pretty significant, both Pro Bowl or All Pro, whatever, offensive line guys going down. I'm just not inclined to move those guys. I think they still will perform and transcend that situation, and so I'm not going to move those guys down in my rankings. But the Eagles backfield guy I actually wanted to talk about was Will Shipley. And so I actually drafted Saquon Barkley in a fantasy football draft here recently, and I was thinking, okay, I had my guy Alex, shout out Alex, tell me, yeah, you need to take the handcuff. I think it's A.J. Dillon. And I was looking at the depth chart, and I was like, I actually think it might be Will Shipley. They had him as the second running back on the depth chart. They come into the preseason game, and lo and behold, he was ahead of A.J. Dillon in terms of how the snaps were divvied out during the preseason game. Shipley played in each of the team's first 14 snaps tonight. And so Will Shipley is the running back 2 there. And so if you are a Saquon Barkley drafter this year, it's probably a pretty good idea to have Will Shipley as one of your later round selections. It depends on how deep your bench is. Obviously, in some formats, you're not going to be in a position to draft Will Shipley because you don't want a guy like that on your bench. But if you can afford it and you have Saquon Barkley, he's great insurance, and I think he is the guy over A.J. Dillon. Time will tell, if Saquon does miss any games this year, but if he does, Will Shipley will become a very valuable fantasy football waiver wire claim quickly. You want to kind of beat people to the crowds on that, he might be a good stash in your roster. Tet McMillan, I think he had 2 catches in this game. Obviously, you saw the over-the-shoulder catch. He should have had a touchdown. Didn't turn his head quick enough, should have had a touchdown. I think the more positive thing for Tet McMillan, outside of the fact that, he played 13 snaps with the starters, ran 7 routes, and had 3 targets. Nobody else had more than 1, okay? And obviously, I think it was Jalen Coker that had the touchdown. Tet was out targeting him. Tet should have had a touchdown. And more importantly, Bryce Young looked pretty good mechanically going through his reads in this game. I think Bryce Young, anybody who watched that game was like, yeah, actually Bryce looked pretty sharp here. That's a really encouraging sign for Tet McMillan. It's encouraging for, that whole offense, but I think specifically for Tet McMillan, being the guy who ran the most routes, being the guy who got the most targets, being the guy who really should have caught a touchdown, and also playing with a quarterback that now we're feeling a little bit better about. I do like Tet McMillan and what he was able to do in this game. Obviously, we're big fans of Tet. Going again at like the 3-4 turn, a lot of times in the 4th in your fantasy football drafts in more competitive leagues. In some of these leagues, Tet McMillan's going like the 6th to 9th round. And let me tell you, if you are playing on a platform where you are getting Tet McMillan there, you should absolutely be taking advantage of that right away. Tet McMillan is going to he could potentially be a league winner this year. I have him ranked very aggressively in my rankings because I believe in Tet McMillan so much. But I think a super positive storyline. Staying on the wide receiver trends here, I think Jordan Addison was a winner from the week 1 of the preseason as well. And, a lot of people are having the conversation like, is Jordan Addison getting these targets, the targets that he's getting because of Justin Jefferson being out? And I understand that argument, but Jordan Addison is getting the same type of catches in these games that he's gotten in his first 2 years in the NFL. And I think the fact of the matter is, and you'll see this in a video we already recorded for this week, with Jordan Addison, I think it's schematic. I think Justin Jefferson helps. I think Justin Jefferson being out is going to get Jordan Addison slightly more targets, but Jordan Addison has been a wide receiver 2 in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. And so I think, fact of the matter is, I think Jordan Addison just fits that scheme really well. And him and J.J. McCarthy clearly had some chemistry. J.J. McCarthy continued to look his way, and I totally understand that when Justin Jefferson's back, he's the one. Of course he's the one. I'm just saying, Addison's a nice pick right now. You're getting him at a discount because of the 3-game suspension. So if you end up getting him in the 7th or 8th, it might actually be worth taking that risk in fantasy football. You're getting him at a discount. I think fits very well in that offense, and schematically, I think Kevin O'Connell drafted him and knows how to use him. But also, Justin Jefferson does have a lingering hamstring thing, and I don't love the hamstring stuff. I'm not drafting JJ, and I'm not worried about it per se, but I will say, if something were to happen to JJ where he were to miss time, he did have some hamstring stuff last year too as well. I mean, Jordan Addison would climb in fantasy football weekly rankings very quickly. And so that's something to consider as well when thinking about if you should take a shot on Jordan Addison this year. I think him and JJ McCarthy displayed some pretty obvious chemistry there. And so I think there were plenty of other winners that we could talk about here. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders balled out, so you had that going on. Losers are the guys that got hurt, like I mentioned. Rashad White, we'll kind of have to see what, and Tyjae Spears, both, backup running backs, and we'll kind of have to see what comes from that. I think the New England Patriots receiver room, somebody that I would say is a loser here. There are so many guys. You had Matt Collins, Demario Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, Kyle Williams, Efton Chisholm, like all these guys. There are like legitimately 8 of them. It's Douglas, Boutte, Bourne, Polk, Baker, Diggs, Matt Collins, and Kyle Williams. I don't know that one of these guys, it probably would be Diggs, obviously. Outside of Diggs, though, I don't think any of those guys that are going to be fighting behind Diggs are going to be productive this year. And I think it kind of showed in the fact that they let most of those guys play, and most of them didn't really do anything. So, I would be a little bit remiss if I didn't mention Isaac Tesla. I just don't think he can be fantasy productive because he is behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's behind Jahmyr Gibbs. He's behind David Montgomery. He's behind Sam Laporte. He's behind Jameson Williams. And so there's really not anything for him to do there. And of course, Jamar Chase did have a touchdown in a preseason game. The dude could score touchdowns in his sleep. And so lots to take away, I think. It is only week 1. We'll learn more next week. But again, with more starters playing this year in the preseason than I think we've seen in the past, I think we can look at this and say, there are some fantasy football takeaways we have. I definitely think, especially with the rookies, you learn a lot about rookies in the preseason. I think you can actually have legitimate takeaways from this. So do me a huge favor. If you enjoyed the video, I'm up at like 11 o'clock recording this because I figured it would be good to try. Make sure you drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed as well. We're going to be bringing you fantasy football content 24/7 from now until the end of the fantasy football season. We're here to help you win your leagues. Go over to the Flock site. I've got it pinned in the comments, flockfantasy.com/domain. If you jump in and join our season pass, you get everything on the site, all of our draft guides, and then you get our algorithm for 2025, which can help you with your draft. You get that included. Plus, you can get in a league with us. It's $34. It's the best deal in the fantasy football space. I promise you won't regret it. You can get over on the Discord as well. Go take advantage of that. Go jump in. Use code domain season pass. You can get in a league with us. We'll be drafting a league here tomorrow. But I'm glad football is back. I'm sure you feel the same way. Thanks guys for watching, and we'll see you later.